Hey everyone, so I was asked to record. I guess I am going to record, but you will have to follow me through these slides. So I'm here with Makia. You see her. Say hey Makia. All right. So she wants me to start going over the brain and cranial nerves development of the brain. I will be looking down. So, but here we go. We will be starting on slide 2 of Kavita's lessons. Damn it. I know you can't see what I'm doing, but I am looking on Blackboard for her slides. Boom. If you didn't know, we are on lecture chapter 14. Here we go. All right. And then we're going to start on the development of the brain, which is on slide 2. All right, boom. So, if you guys didn't know, also Chelsea, the wonderful Chelsea, made a what's this, a study guide kind of, and I'm going to show it to Makia so you can read off of that. Because I was gonna draw it, but since Chelsea, the beautiful Chelsea, made this already, I will just show you. Here it is, and you can just follow along. It's gonna be the first page. So the development of the brain. So when the brain is first developing, it's in the three to 4 week embryo. It starts off with the neuronal tube, just like in the video. If you didn't know, go to the videos that I sent through the text message, you guys, and you guys can see the one of the videos was Crash Course, and he talked about the brain. So he started off with before we start developing into our 2 to 3 week embryo, we have a neuronal tube. That neuronal tube will then go off into 3 sections during the 3 to 4 week embryo, and that will be the prosencephalon, the mesocephalon, and the rhombencephalon. Luckily, like he said, the mesocephalon doesn't develop any further when we get to the 5 week embryo, and so we will just need to keep it will stay the mesocephalon or the midbrain. But both the prosencephalon and the rhombencephalon subdivide into 2 secondary brain vesicles. So the prosencephalon will give rise to the telecephalon and the diencephalon. And so the telecephalon will then develop into the cerebrum and the lateral ventricles. So remember, he said the telecephalon, the big part of the brain, that cerebrum, goes from prosencephalon to telecephalon, and that's the cerebrum. Then we have the diencephalon, which is also another branch off of the prosencephalon. The diencephalon forms the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the epithalamus, and also the third ventricle. And then we also have, now that we're done with the development of the prosencephalon, now we're on to the rhombencephalon. Now, the rhombencephalon is going to split up into the metacephalon and the myelocephalon. And when I said to them, it was that you can remember the 3 M's in alphabetical order. So the mesocephalon, STY. Mesocephalon is the midbrain and don't develop any further. The metacephalon and the myelocephalon are the 2 separate subdivides. It's okay. So I said that the metencephalon. So if you look on the paper, you'll see rhombencephalon, and you'll see it'll subdivide into 2 other parts, and those will be the metacephalon, and then it'll also be the myelencephalon. So the metacephalon will become pons, the cerebellum, and then the upper part of the fourth ventricle. But the myelencephalon, what it will do, it will form the medulla oblongata and then the lower part of the fourth ventricle. And if you didn't know, the medulla oblongata is part of the brainstem, right? And so remember that the medulla oblongata starts the spinal cord as well. So it's where the brain ends and the spinal cord begins. So Y STY, so STY is going to be the order in which the brain will develop. So the mesocephalon is first because that's the midbrain. It don't develop any further. But then we have the rhombencephalon separates into two, which is the metacephalon and then the myelencephalon. The metacephalon is the first one, so that's why it's T, and then Y is the last one, which is the myelencephalon. So you see it goes STY in the M category of the brain development. So when we get into an adult brain, also just so you know, these cephalons, the prosencephalon, mesocephalon, rhombencephalon, or the telecephalon, the diencephalon, the metacephalon, and the myelencephalon, all gonna be called also cavities. So if you see here, this is something I don't like using. But the on slide 3, there is going to be a picture. It's going to be called table 4.14.1, and that's going to include all the how it moves, how it develops. So then we're talking about now. There's 4 major parts of the brain. It's the brainstem, the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and then the diencephalon. The diencephalon is again going to consist of the epithalamus, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and then also the third ventricle. They just say diencephalon because you don't want you don't want to say all that, so they just put it into one category. And so the brainstem is the portion of the brain that's superior to the spinal cord. So superior means up top, inferior means below. So the portion of brain that's going to be above the spinal cord, and it's going to consist of the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. Um, then we have the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is posterior to the brainstem. So posterior means behind, so it's back. So here we have. I'm gonna show you. Actually, you can look at the picture. Here's the on slide 5. Here's the medulla oblongata, and then so the cerebellum is going to be in the back of it. So it's going to be right here. This is the cerebellum. What it does, the cerebellum governs balance and coordinates skilled movements, and it's the second largest part of the brain. The second. Can you guess what the largest part of the brain is? Right. So the cerebrum is going to be supported by the diencephalon and the brainstem, and it's going to be the largest part of the brain, and it's derived from the telecephalon. So remember when we talked about the prosencephalon, how it divides into the telecephalon and diencephalon. Well, the telecephalon makes the cerebrum. Hmm. Hmm. And ventricles are also going to be called cavities. So if you ever get confused when I say cavities, then no, I'm talking about ventricles. Um, and so the cerebrum is going to be not cut, but it's going to be split into 2 hemispheres. It's going to be two cerebral hemispheres, and it's going to be. We'll talk about fissures in a little while, but it's going to be in the middle. It's going to be separate. Those 2 hemispheres are going to be separated by a longitudinal fissure. And then we have the diencephalon, which is the epithalamus, the hypothalamus, and then the uh, and then the thalamus. Uh, and that's going to be the diencephalon, and they're all going to be above the brainstem. So if you see here, here's the cerebrum I'm on slide 5. Here's the cerebrum. Right here is the thalamus. Here is the hypothalamus. Right here is the brainstem. Here is the pons. This is the medulla oblongata right here. We have the cerebellum, and then again, here's the cerebrum. And then right here is the spinal cord. Now let's talk about protective coverings on the brain. So we're gonna go to slide 7. So the cranium and the cranial meninges are what protect the brain. Cranium's easy. Crazy cranium is a skull, right? So skull is going to be one protective covering of the brain. But we're also going to have cranial meninges. So just like spinal cord meninges, the cranial meninges are going to have the same amount. So they're going to have the same one. So we're going to have the dura matter, the arachnoid matter, and the pia matter. But the dura matter is going to be split up into 2 layers. So there's the periosteal layer, and which is going to be external, the outermost layer of the dura mater. Yeah, so PERIOSTAL layer. And that's going to be the outermost layer of the dura mater. And then we have the meningeal layer, which is the internal or the innermost layer of the dura mater. And that's going to be spelled MENINGEAL. And so both these layers of the dura mater are going to be fused together. But they're going to be fused together until they get to this one sinus that's called the dural venous sinuses. And I will explain what those are in a little while. But just know both the layers are going to be fused together until it gets to the dura venous sinus. And those dural venous sinuses, what they do is they're lined with endothelial cells, and they're going to be lined, and those endothelial lines are going to be lined on venous channels, and they're going to drain venous blood. It's going to drain blood. So basically, what the sinus does, it drains blood from the brain into the IJVS. And if you don't know what that means, it's the interjugular vein. So remember, if somebody says, I'm going to hit you in the jugular, that means that they're going to, right here, is going to spoot up blood, because that's where all the blood from the brain is going to. And that's directed right to the heart. So it's a major vein that if you hit it, you're going to bleed instantly. So not only does the dura mater have 2 layers, but it has 3 extensions to it. And what those extensions do is they separate parts of the brain. So I said there are 3 extensions of the dura mater, and those what those extensions do is they separate parts of the brain. So let's go to the first one. Let's talk about the falx cerebri. The falx cerebri separates the 2 hemispheres, so the 2 sides of the cerebrum. So then the falx cerebelli separates the 2 hemispheres of the cerebellum. And then there's the tentorium cerebelli, separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum. So if you want to look here, this is not the best picture, but here's the falx cerebelli. So it separates the 2 hemispheres of the cerebellum. Then we have the falx cerebri up here, and it separates the 2 hemispheres of the cerebrum. Then we have the tentorium one, which is right here, and you see it will separate the cerebellum from the cerebrium. The cerebrum from the cerebellum. Tentorium cerebelli. Did you check if it was still recording while you were recording? Probably is. I see the light right there. So the light it says it's still recording. Maybe I should make you guys look at this slide too a little bit here. There you go. So the brain blood barrier and the brain blood flow. So brain the brain is going to consist of 2% of our total body weight, but it will consume 20% of our oxygen and glucose that we obtain. But it will consume 20% of oxygen and glucose that we consume. So there's no glucose in our brain though. But we need glucose in our brain to create that energy. And so how do we obtain it? So neurons will generate ATP from glucose that is within our body. So those neurons will generate ATP from glucose that use via reactions that use oxygen. So when the activity of neurons and neuroglia increases in a particular region of the brain, the blood flow of that area will also increase. So when the activity of neurons and neuroglia increases, um, the blood flow will also increase, and that's in any region of the brain. It will increase blood flow in the brain. So let's say there's an interruption in blood flow, though. That can be very bad. So for 1 to 2 minutes of no blood flow, it may impair like neuronal function, and we can even have total deprivation of oxygen. But for 4 minutes, if we don't get enough oxygen and enough blood flow to the brain for 4 minutes, that we will have permanent damage to the brain, and we can eventually die. With neural function, it will cause permanent damage or permanent injury. And so, how does blood get carried to the brain? It's through arteries and through internal carotid. So, carotid and arteries are what move blood to the brain. Carotid, so CAROTID, and arteries carry blood to the brain. And so the brain has no glucose that's stored in it, right? So that means that glucose needs to be constantly given to the brain continuously. And if we don't get enough oxygen to the brain, that's going to cause like dizziness, convulsions, uh, loss of consciousness if we're not getting enough glucose. But also, if I talked about arteries and carotid give the brain blood, but what all that blood can't stay in the brain, or we're gonna have like an exploding brain, which isn't cool. And so what gets the blood from the brain is the internal jugular veins, and they're gonna return the blood from the brain into the heart. Because you remember the heart is the one that pumps the blood, and so it's pumping blood to the brain, and the brain's gonna give that blood back to the heart. So then we talk about the blood-brain barrier because you can't have harmful substances going into the brain, right? So that's why we have a blood-brain barrier. And I think on the study guide that I gave you, I think there is a something that looks like it might be blood-brain barrier. Talk about it. No, nothing. Okay. So basically, a barrier, a blood-brain barrier is going to be a barrier that consists of brain of neuroglia cells, which are those neuroglia cells are going to be astrocytes, and also brain capillaries. And their is to protect the brain from harmful substances um, and materials from the blood to the cerebral spinal fluid and then to the brain. So the blood-brain barrier will consist of astrocytes and brain capillaries that will prevent the passage of materials from the blood to the cerebral spinal fluid and then to the brain. All right. And so it's also going to consist of endothelial cells. So not only will the blood-brain barrier consist of brain capillaries, yes, yes, to the brain. So go from the blood will go from the cerebral spinal fluid to the brain. All right. It also consists of endothelial cells, which are going to be endos of the brain capillaries, and also surround brain capillaries. So the endothelial cells surround the capillary, or it's going to be so. What I'm saying is, if you see on the slide, it talks about tight junctions. Tight junctions are going to what separate endothelial cells of brain capillaries. So brain capillaries consist of endothelial cells. I'm on slide 12, by the way, you guys. They're gonna consist of endothelial cells, and those endothelial cells, what they do is they press up against. So the process is, so basically capillaries are made of endothelial cells. That's what I'm saying, and so now astrocytes and capillaries push together and secrete chemicals that maintain the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. So what I'm saying is, remember I said harmful substances need to not stay in, but also blood needs to go throughout, right? So what it does is just like a filter. A filter will take the stuff you don't want in your water out, but keep the water coming in. Same thing with here. The blood-brain barrier filters what goes in and what doesn't. And it does that because there's a chemical that's produced by capillaries and astrocytes to make that filter possible. Yeah, can you open it for him, please? I will be pausing. Everyone, if you can see, Q is here now. There she is. And we'll be starting right where we are now, and that is the blood-brain barrier. So here we go. All right. So again, so what can go inside of the blood-brain barrier? What can and what cannot? All right. So what can go in it into the blood-brain barrier easily is going to be oxygen, carbon dioxide, alcohol, and then many anesthetics, and those are all going to be called lipid-soluble substances. It's also up here. Right? And so water soluble substances cross the blood brain barrier by active transport. So it doesn't easily cross it. It needs active transport to let it come in, and that's going to be water soluble substances. An example of that would be glucose. There's also some that cross it, but will cross it very slowly, and that would be carotene, urea, and also most ions will cross the blood-brain barrier very slowly. Try this one. No, glucose is a water soluble substance. And it uses active transport to go inside of the blood brain barrier. Because you know the blood brain barrier is like a membrane. And so then we also have stuff that will not pass it, and that will be like proteins and antibiotics. They do not pass the blood, do not pass from the blood to the brain tissue. It will stay outside. It will not go in. So, but say that there's trauma, or we have like toxins or inflammation to the blood brain, to the brain, that can cause the blood brain barrier to deteriorate. And so that can cause those harmful substances to come inside of the brain. And we don't want that. Now, enough about this fucking blood. So we filtered the blood out, right? It's filtered. Remember, I said the blood needs to now go to the CSF. So now we're going to talk about cerebrospinal fluid. I am on page 14, slide 14. So the cerebrospinal fluid is a fluid that's produced by epidermal cells. So remember I said capillaries are filled with endothelial cells? Well, now cerebrospinal fluid is going to be made of produced by epidermal cells, and they're going to cover the choroid plexus. And I wish if you looked on that little study sheet that Chelsea made, there's a picture of the brain cut. No, not that one. It's on the other page. Right. Yes. And it should be a picture of the choroid plexus. It is going to yes, right there. No, we're about to talk about that. But this is the choroid plexus. Oh, okay. All right. All right. And so, ow, right over my toe. I'm barefoot, you guys. Don't pay me no mind. But so yes, the cerebrospinal fluid is going to be produced by the epidermal cells, and they're going to cover the choroid plexus and in the ventricles of the brain. In the ventricles of the brain, in it. So what does the cerebrospinal fluid do? It circulates, and so it circulates through the ventricles or in the cavities. Ventricles are also cavities. It circulates in the ventricles, the central canal, and the central canal, and in the subarachnoid space around the brain, and in the spinal cord. So this, we'll talk about how it all goes through the loop-de-loop. But just to let you know, there's the cerebrospinal fluid will circulate in the ventricles, and it will eventually go to the central canal and the subarachnoid space, which is in the spinal cord, and then we'll go to the spinal cord, and then it will go to a process all over again. And we will talk about that. But first, we will talk about ventricles because you need to know what cerebrospinal fluid is, need to know what ventricles it goes through, and then you'll know how it all circulates. Make sense? So there's 3 functions of the cerebrospinal fluid. Function number 1, it has mechanical protection. What does that mean? So that means it basically absorbs shock. And that when it absorbs shock, so when I do this, my brain's not going like this against the skull. It's the cerebrospinal fluid kind of makes the brain float, and it will cause that brain to have mechanical protection and absorb that shock. It also provides optimal chemical environment for neuronal signaling, so it makes it easy for neurons to signal each other. And then the last thing, circulation. It will help exchange nutrients and waste between blood and the nervous tissue. It will provide an optimal chemical environment. So basically, what I'm saying, cerebrospinal fluid will help maintain homeostasis. That's what I'm saying. So what is the cerebrospinal fluid made out of? It contains small amount of glucose, proteins, lactic acid, urea, electrolytes, cations, sodium, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chlorine, bicarbonate, like it will include all that. So let's talk about ventricles. So we talked about what cerebrospinal fluid is. It's a fluid that helps maintain protection, absorb shock, all that other whoop-de-doo, what the fuck shit. Now we're talking about ventricles. So there's a total of 4 cerebrospinal fluid filled ventricles within the brain. And they're gonna be inferior chamber of the heart. All right, so now let's talk about the first one. Remember I said that which development stage produces lateral ventricles? I'm gonna give them a second to guess it. Okay, yeah, just say it, girl. Yes, it's the telecephalon. That will be the one that will have the lateral ventricle in it. So telecephalon cerebrum. It will have the lateral ventricle within it. And so the lateral ventricle is there's going to be 2 lateral ventricles, and there's going to be 1 in each side of the cerebral hemisphere. Yeah, girl. Get that picture out. Cerebral, or the 2 hemispheres of the cerebrum, or also known as the cerebral hemispheres. Right? And so then what they do is those 2 lateral ventricles will then communicate with the 3rd ventricle. And if you want a depiction of what this all looks like, you can look on slide 16. Boom. And in the 3rd ventricle, it's going to be in the diencephalon. So the third ventricle is going to be in the, if I say diencephalon, what does that mean? What's in the diencephalon? Right, and also includes the third ventricle. You got another one? May I have another one? You're over here going to eat in front of me, knowing I'm hungry. Oh, keep up for the loops. Keep up for the loop. All right. Oh my god, I haven't had these in years. I've been had these in years. Oh, that tastes so good. Look at your face. This is crack. This is crack cocaine at its finest. And so the fourth ventricle, it's gonna remember all these ventricles are gonna be cavities that are filled with cerebral spinal fluid. And so the fourth ventricle will lie between the brainstem and the cerebellum. And what does the brainstem consist of? Oblongata, yeah. Mm-hmm. Midbrain.
Midbrain. I was guessing it because I used to just think about touching like that.
All the ventricles are connected some way somehow. And so I'm gonna show you a picture. On slide 16, you'll see here's the fourth ventricle. Here are the lateral ventricles. Here's the third ventricle, and then here's the fourth ventricle. You see how it's all connected? All right. But wait, I said there's 4 cerebral spinal fluid filled cavities. I only said 3. The last one is going to be called the cerebral aqueduct, or the aqueduct of the midbrain. And can you guess where it is? Yeah. So the cerebral aqueduct will be in the midbrain. Boom. And also, I forgot one more thing. The rhombencephalon has the 4th ventricle because each one, the metacephalon and the myelocephalon, have the right, but it's not called the rhombencephalon because the rhombencephalons only will be from 3 to 4 week embryo. So then it develops into the mesocephalon and the myelocephalon. Mm-hmm. Don't get that confused. The only thing that does not develop from the 3 to 4 week will be the midbrain. Man, this is so good. You finished it already? Damn, girl. It's been so long. I remember when we had the one. I remember when you had the ones that put on your tongue and gives you a tattoo.
Oh yeah, definitely. Let's start making something else.
Oh yeah, the way they just gush in your mouth.
Yeah. I had the one at a time. I don't want to do all this stuff.
All right. Now we can go to Makia's favorite part and show how it all works together. The formation and the circulation of the cerebral spinal fluid in the ventricles. Mm-hmm. All right. We're on slide 18. If you want to visit a representation, you can go to slide 19. Or the beautiful Chelsea did create a study guide that has the circulation on it. And you can also look on slide. Yep. Okay. So like I said, the CSF is production is going to be majorly in the choroid plexus, right? And the choroid plexus is going to be a network of blood capillaries that's going to be in the walls of each of the 4 ventricles. I did. Remember? I said the 4th ventricle is going to be the brainstem and the cerebellum. I did talk about it. I said it's a cavity filled with cerebrospinal fluid that lies between the brainstem and the cerebellum. So within the brainstem is the palm, yeah. And it's also going to have an aqueduct, cerebral aqueduct. It's a ventricle in the midbrain. Mm-hmm. And so then the epidermal cells are going to be covered, are going to line the ventricles that are gonna have blood capillaries or brain capillaries. Same thing. Blood, brain capillaries is the same thing. And the epidermal cells will cover the brain capillaries of the choroid plexus and then produce CSF. Yeah, so it's gonna line the ventricles and cover the blood capillaries of the choroid plexus. Oh shit, I got you. Charge my laptop. Thank you. Yes, that creates that produces CSF.
And one more thing. Plasma is drawn from the choroid plexus.
Yeah. Plasma is going to be drawn from the choroid plexus. And so what happens is that selected substances, mostly water, are going to come from the blood plasma, and it's going to be filtered from the capillaries, and then are going to be secreted by the epidermal cells to produce CSF. So this is how it all works down. This is how CSF comes about. So remember the blood, we already done the blood-brain barrier. We don't got to worry about that shit. Because the blood's already in there now. Now it needs to go to the CSF. So what happens is that from the blood plasma, from the blood that got filtered, because if you guys don't know, I deal with blood plasma at my job, and blood plasma. Mm-hmm. Actually, that's actually what I do. I work in yes, y'all, I'm a phlebotomist, lab technician, whatever. I deal with blood. And so what I do is that you'll see when blood gets filtered, it becomes blood plasma. I have to deal with that every day, and I gotta filter it and everything. So selected substances, mostly water, from the blood plasma. So from that filtered blood already, the water will come out. Mostly water will come out, and they're going to be secreted by epidermal cells, and those are going to produce CSF. Will produce CSF in the choroid plexus. All right. And so then we have, so let's go with now the circulation of CSF. Making sure I stay on the study guide. Don't pay attention to what just fell out. No, I was talking to. Yeah, because definitely they saw something go like, and I'm like, okay, don't pay attention to what fell out. Let's see. We are on. We already finished parts of the brain. No, we're on the formation and circulation, and then we'll take a 5-minute pee break. That's what I gotta do. All right. So we are now gonna go on slide 22. And you could also look at her study guide. I think it's on the back page. Yes, on the back page you can see the circulation of CSF. Mm-hmm. Chelsea from class. You probably, I don't know.
Describe how she looked to you.
No, you haven't. No, we didn't study with me and you didn't study with her separately. You hear us talk about you, Chelsea? She's so weird. I'm playing with you, Chelsea. Um. So the circulation of CFS. So the CSF is formed in the choroid plexus, right? All right. And that choroid plexus is going to be in both lateral ventricles. It's going to be in both lateral ventricles. And then from the lateral ventricles, it will flow into the third ventricle through two narrow openings. So but how it gets into the third ventricle, there are two narrow openings in the beginning of the third ventricle. And that two oval narrow openings are going to be called the interventricular foramina, and it's right here if you need to know how to spell it. It's right on page 22, slide 22, right here. And from those two openings in the beginning of the third ventricle, it will then move on to the third ventricle, and then the CSF will then flow um, into the aqueduct of the midbrain. But remember, you guys, that all the ventricles have a choroid plexus. So that means that all the ventricles are going to produce CSF, and all the ventricles will keep adding onto the CFF into the brain, into the ventricles. All right. All right, and so then the fluid then flows through the third ventricle into the aqueduct of the midbrain, or the cerebral aqueduct. And then the cerebral aqueduct the fluid will then pass through the cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle. And all these choroid plexuses and all these ventricles will then keep producing more and more cerebral spinal fluid to be put. Okay. All right. So then, after the fourth ventricle, the fluid moves from the fourth ventricle. The CSF will then enter the subarachnoid space, which, remember, we talked about that in chapter 13. And then there's three openings in the roof of the fourth ventricle. I'm sorry. So there's three openings in the roof of the fourth ventricle. So the first opening is going to be called a median aperture. So a MEDIAN. It's down on the slides. So the CFF enters the subarachnoid space through three openings in the fourth ventricle. Mm-hmm. Yes, 3 openings of the fourth ventricle. And the CSF will flow into the subarachnoid space by the median aperture, so that's one of the openings. And then the 2 other openings are going to be called lateral apertures. Apertures are APENTURE, and also the lateral apertures, AMPENTURES. There's 2 lateral and then 1 median. All right. So then what happens when it goes into the subarachnoid space? So then the CFS will go from the subarachnoid space, and then the CFS will then circulate in the central canal and in the subarachnoid space around the surface of the brain and the spinal cord. Subarachnoid space, and it will then go around the surface of the brain and the spinal cord. I'm still gotta see. So then the CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid, is then gradually reabsorbed into the blood through this thing called the arachnoid villi. Mm-hmm. All right, and so from there, it will go then to the arachnoid villi of the dural venous sinuses into the venous blood. Then that will go into the heart and lungs, and then the heart and lungs will go. The cerebrospinal fluid will go through the arteries of the blood, and then it will go back into the ventricles, and then it's a vicious circle of life. All right. And we will take a 5-minute break, and I will go pee. And I will pause it. I'm back. It's time to start again. So we're done with the circulation of CSF. Now we're going to talk about the structures of each part of the brain. So let's start off with the one that has many parts of the brain, and we're going to start about the brain stem. That includes the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. And if you need a referral, what they look like or where they're located, here is a picture, and I am on slide 5 to show them the picture of where it is. So the medulla oblongata is here, the midbrain is right here, and the pons is right here. And we are now going to go back to slide 25. All right, so now we're going to talk about the first part, which is going to be the medulla oblongata, and let's just talk about that a little bit. Okay, all right. Okay. All right, so the medulla oblongata is the most inferior part of the brain. When I say inferior, it means what? Yes, so it's going to be the lowest part of the brain. Because remember, that's where the spinal cord is going to be starting. It also forms the inferior part of the brainstem. So not only is it the most inferior part of the brain, it's the inferior part of the brainstem. So it begins at where it starts. So I don't know if you can see it on here. It's not on here. Hoopsticles. But all right, it's not on here. But you'll see that the brainstem. The medulla oblongata begins at the foramen of the foramen magnum. It's not on here. I apologize. She is not good with this stuff. No, the medulla oblongata begins at the foramen magnum. So the FORAMEN, magnum, MAG.
No, she should know how to spell that. You having sex right now, so
Crazy. So it's just going to be a part of the brain that's going to be within that brainstem. So it's going to be inside though. You're not going to see it. That's why it doesn't show you on here. But you also see the choroid plexus, which is right there, the little red part. But anyway, then it extends into the inferior border of the pons. So remember the pons is the little circle thing, right? That I showed you on the brain on slide 5. So inferior, yes, it's gonna extend to the inferior border of the pons. Yes. And it's small though, so like that's why you won't really notice it like that. But if you'll notice, but it's only 3 centimeters. So the medullas. All right, so the medulla has white matter too, just like just like remember we talked about the cerebrum. If we cut the cerebrum on the outside is gray matter, but on the inside is white matter. Same thing with all parts of the brain. Inside is white, outside is gray. So inside, so if we cut the medulla oblongata, you see that it has white right here. And so if we cut it, it contains all sensory tracts and motor tracts that extend between the spinal cord and other parts of the brain. Because that's where the spinal cord begins, so it's where everything sends up to the brain, right? And so I said that the medulla's white matter will contain tracts, both sensory and then motor tracts that come from the spinal cord. 2 tracts, the motor and the sensory tracts. Um, yes, it contains 2 tracts, the motor and sensory tracts, and they're going to be coming from the spinal cord. And then it will send those messages from the spinal cord to the other parts of the brain to where it needs to go. Because the forebrain, the midbrain, the hindbrain, the different lobes, they all have different functions towards it. And so it will go to the brain that needs to deal with that function for that moment. So if I said like if I stepped on a tack, right? You guys I haven't talked about these, but if I stepped on a tack, I need to go to the part of the brain that inhibits pain. And which part of that? Which lobe? Anybody know? The parietal? Oh yes. It's the parietal because the temporal will it will do something else, and I'll explain that a little later. And the occipital has to do with like sense the vision, but we will talk about that. So then there's also the medulla oblongata. The white matter at the medulla oblongata will form bulges on the anterior aspect of the medulla, which is right here, and they are going to be called pyramids. And how they're formed is they're formed by corticospinal tracts that pass from the cerebrum to the spinal cord. And this is all right here. All what I said is right here. And those are called pyramids. All right. So superior to the junction of the medulla with the spinal cord. So before the medulla and the spinal cord, there's 90% of the axons in the left pyramid will then cross with the right side. So 90% of whatever's on this side of the left here, not whatever happened. Basically, what I'm saying, what happened to this pyramid, what happened to this pyramid. So all the whatever being said on this side of the pyramid will be said on this side of the pyramid too. So whatever happened will happen to both sides, and those axons will cross on each side. All right. And so then this is going to be called the decustation of pyramids or decustation. And they're going to include the ascending and a descending track. So you can just say right here, this is where pyramids come of pyramids. So in the medulla oblongata, there are centers, or also called nuclei. So nuclei are going to be collection of neuronal cell bodies in the CNS, or also they're called centers. Some nuclei will control vital body functions, and so let's talk about cardiovascular centers or cardiovascular nuclei, which are again collection of neuronal cell bodies in the CNS. So cardiovascular nuclei are groups of neurons that regulate heart rates, and then they and they cause the force of the heartbeat. So again, the cardiovascular nuclei or the cardiovascular center are groups of neurons that help regulate heart rates, and they also will create the force of the heartbeat. They regulate the force of it, not heartbeat, not the repetition, but they regulate the force of the heartbeat. Hmm. And the force of the heartbeat, and they also regulate diameters of blood vessels. All right, so then we also have the medullary respiratory center, or simply just call it respiratory center or respiratory nuclei. These are these are a group of neurons of the respiratory center in the medulla oblongata. And of course, they're going to deal with breathing, right? So what it mainly does is adjust the basic rhythm of breathing. So that rhythm, me breathing, these are going to be this is going to be under the control of the respiratory center. But also, not only is the cardiovascular and the respiratory center part of the medulla oblongata, but the medulla oblongata also has centers for vomiting, swallowing, sneezing, coughing, swallowing, hiccuping, coughing. They're also going to be centers. They're going to be centers in the medulla oblongata. Yeah, it. Don't worry, it's a typo. We'll talk about that, which is in the very last slides of this chapter. And I also have a way of remembering cranial nerves. I know you guys are gonna love that. How to remember the different ones, but we'll talk about that later. But I do want you to know the different types, and they're also, you can look at my book, but to write what they are, because I'm not about to spell them out. Like, it's too much. But we have the vestibulocochlear nerves. We have the glossopharyngeal nerves. We have the vagus nerves. We have the accessory nerves. And we also have the hypoglossal nerves. Those are the 5 pairs of cranial nerves and the medulla oblongata. And you can look right here. I think I actually did printed out this for you guys. So it has all the nerves and all the no, I haven't printed out because I was like I was gonna give it to you guys and study. Yes. Um and it says all the nerves, what numeral there are, and also
extra numeric number next to it
with
because asked me to learn Roman numerals.
I did not put the numeric number next to it. Let me see if I printed it out. If I have it with me, because I don't know if I brought it with me. If not, it's probably in the office. Oh, wait, no, no, my bad. This ain't it. Yes, I do. Yay! And it's front and back. Thank you. Was it not flying? I don't remember. Those are different ones. Each one, these are all the nerves. So there's some on the back too. So remember, it says this one to this one. So you have to go look at the numerals. So you see, one of them is going to be the vestibulocochlear, the glossopharyngeal, the vagus, accessory, and the hypoglossal. So you just look at the numbers, the Roman numerals, and you'll see them on the paper, and you can see which ones are where. How you doing? All right. And so the ventricle that you will see in the medulla oblongata is the 4th ventricle. Now let's talk about pons. So again, here's the medulla oblongata. Boom, 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 on slide 28. Hey y'all. So superior to the medulla oblongata, are pons, and anterior to the cerebellum is pons again. So pons are superior to the medulla oblongata and anterior to the cerebellum. And it forms a bridge between the medulla oblongata, the midbrain, and interior of the cerebellum. So when doing this, it also builds a bridge. Huh? Anterior.
Right here. And then you gotta think about where your palms be sitting at when that brain stem is right in front of.
Here, look. Here's the cerebellum. Here's the pons. It's anterior to the cerebellum. All right. And so it will consist of both nuclei and tracts. So remember, centers are nuclei. So the medulla oblongata had nuclei, but but not a lot of tracks. Ponds have both nuclei and tracks. And so let's talk about the different nuclei of the ponds. So ponds connect, how ponds are connected, right? They're connected by bundles of axons of these nuclei. And some axons are going to be connect right and left sides of the cerebellum, and then other parts are going to be a part of the sensory and motor tracts. So then let's talk about the pontine nuclei, which is in the pons. What this does is relay signals for voluntary movement, and it's going to come from the cerebral cortex to the cerebellum. So it's going to relay signals for voluntary movements that originate in the cerebrum, and then it's going to go into the cerebellum. All right, and so then you have the pneumotactics area, and then the apneuist area. By the way, I'm on slide 29. I know I can't say shit, so look at it. And these are going to be areas that control breathing.
What's that MO stand
for? With MO, let me see what I have. With medulla oblongata. Mm-hmm. So along with the medulla oblongata, the two areas are going to control breathing. And it's going to be also, these two areas are going to be a collection of neurons in the pons. Because remember, the areas are also going to be the nuclei in the pons. So centers are nuclei in the medulla oblongata. Areas are a bundle of nuclei in the pons. All right. And the nuclei of the cranial nerves in the pons are going to be the cranial nerves 5 through 8. So they're going to be the trigeminal nerves, the abduction nerve, the facial nerves, and the vestibulocochlear nerves. You'll see in the thing, they're from here to here, right here, in the front. Okay, my bad. The cranial nerve, I put 7 through 11. I mean 7 through 12. That's 8 through 12. Yeah, it's 8 through 12, and then this one includes 5 through 8. All right, so now we're talking about the midbrain. So the midbrain, remember, the midbrain stays the same as when we went through the developmental stage, right? Because the midbrain doesn't develop. So it stays at the mesocephalon. And so it extends from the pons to the diencephalon. It's about 2 to 5, I want to say 2 to 5 centimeters long, around there. All right, and so let's talk about the ventricle that's found. Oh, sorry, it's okay. The ventricle that is found in the membrane is going to be the cerebral aqueduct, or the aqueduct of the midbrain. All right. All right, and then also the midbrain will also contain both nuclei and also tracts. So it's same like the pons, it had nuclei and tracts. Same thing with the midbrain, it will have nuclei and tracts. So then we have the cerebral uh, peduncles. And so those are going to be the most anterior part of the midbrain. And they're going to contain bundles of axons of the corticospinal, the corticobulbar, the corticopontine tracts. So they're going to be bundles of axons that are going to be of the corticospinal, the corticopontine, the corticobulbar tracts. I'm on slide 30, by the way. My goal is to get to slide 50, y'all. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Where did you stop from? Where did you stop?
They didn't get this far. Last time I saw them. Okay, so then what the cerebral punctals do is they conduct nerve impulses from motor areas in the cerebral cortex. The pendicles? Yes. What they do is conduct nerve impulses from motor areas in the cerebral cortex. To the spinal cord, medulla oblongata, and the pons. All right, and then let's talk. We talked about the interior part, but now we need to talk about the posterior part of the cerebral punctacles, and that's going to be called a tectum. So the superior part of the cerebral punctacles are going to be called tectums. And so those are going to contain four rounded elevations of two of them are going to be called the superior cocci, and then two superior parts are going to be called the superior cocci, and then the two inferior parts are going to be called the inferior cocci. So again, there are two parts of the cerebral punctacles. There's the anterior part and the posterior part. And the posterior part of the cerebral peduncles are called tectums. And they're going to have they're going to contain four rounded elevations. And two of them are going to be called superior cocci, and then two inferior elevations are going to be called inferior cocci. I'm on slide 30. And what this does, it serves as a reflex center for like visual activities like tracking, moving, scanning, stationary images. You see me moving my eye. And so these are going to be So what these four elevations do and what the posterior part of the cerebral punctacles do is they are the reflex centers for certain visual activities like tracking, like moving, like scanning stationary images or items. So like scanning this, and I'm looking at it, I see that it's black, it's beautiful, it's a lovely can. All right, but that was sorry. But that was only for the superior cocci, you guys. So I didn't say that, but the superior cocci is the one that deals with scanning, tracking, and moving. But the inferior cocci, what it does is going to be part of the auditory pathways. So this is going to relay impulses from the receptors for hearing in the inner brain. So the inferior elevations or the inferior cocci are going to be part of the auditory pathways. Mm-hmm. And so what they do is relay impulses from the receptors for hearing in the inner ear to the brain. So those receptors of hearing is going to be put in the ear and it's going to be sent to the brain. Mm-hmm. And also, what it is, it's also a reflex center for startle reflex. So I get startled, like, oh, I'm startled. All right. Okay. So the midbrain just doesn't include the cerebral the tectum and the cerebral punctacles and stuff like that. It also has several other types of nuclei. So, for example, it includes something called the substantia nigra. Yeah, right here. So the superior inferior cocci are going to be centers for startle. Also going to be centers for startle. Okay. The superior and the inferior cocci are also going to be the centers of startle. I said that. It's both. The inferior is going to have to deal with auditory reception, and then the superior is going to have to deal with reflex of visual activities, like a startle reflex. They're both going to work together. Very good perception. So not all midbrains, not just midbrain just didn't have those two parts of it, right? It's also include the substantia nigra. So no, I'm not calling nobody a nigger. I'm saying nigga, nigra. And so this is going to be a large area with dark pigments in it. I'm on slide 32. And it's going to help control subconscious muscle activities. Those actually took good ones. Mm-hmm. All right. So again, this is coming right from the slide because in the book it didn't really discuss it like that, but hers is a little bit more detailed this time in the slides. And it's going to be a large area with dark pigments. And what it does is help control subconscious muscle activities. What it also does, neurons that release dopamine extend from the substantia nigra to the basal nuclei, and they're going to help control subconscious muscle activities and also loss. To also, it's going to be associated with Parkinson's disease. If you lose neurons, if you have a loss of neurons, which release dopamine in the substantia nigra, this is going to be associated with Parkinson's disease. Remember, she was talking about Parkinson's disease in class. We are on substantia nigra. And you said this one. This one, if there's a loss of neurons in the substantia nigra, this is going to be associated with Parkinson's disease. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They got tremors, and those tremors need to be suppressed. And they're suppressed by the neurons that's in the nigra. Mm-hmm. Okay, when she said red, did she talk about this? The ruby, the ruby. It's also called ruby something. We ain't get there yet. So don't jump the gun. We ain't get there yet. Yeah, just don't jump. Just because I'm also on videoing, so like we're trying to gradually get to where we're going. All right, so last one we're going to talk about is the red nucleus. And then the red nuclei, what it does, there's left and right. There's left and right red nuclei, and they're going to be rich, and they're red because of the rich blood supply.
They're very vascular.
Vascular, which means it had blood vessels.
It has an abundance of blood vessels.
Right, so it's going to be rich in blood supply and contain iron-containing pigment. And what the red nucleus does, or the red nuclei, what they do is help control voluntary movements of the limbs. And so what nerves will you find here? You will find the oculomotor nerve and the trochlear nerves. Just those two. The oculomotor nerves and the trochlear nerves. All right. And this is a picture of the midbrain on slide 33. Boop, 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 boop. Any questions so far? I know y'all shut up. But any questions so far? I'm saying these people right here can't ask me questions because they can't see me. Any questions from you guys? No, the ocular motor. So that would be number, I believe, 3. Yep, oculomotor, and also trochlear. So that would be number 4. All right. Next, here's the pic. So let's put it all together, right? Just so it's not like too much. But let's talk about here. Yeah. So here's the cerebral puncticle. And remember, there's an anterior part, so it's going to be up here, and then a posterior part. So anterior part, and then a posterior part. The posterior part is going to be called the tectum. And there, it's going to have 4 elevations, right? So the superior calculi right here, there's 2 of them right here, and it's also going to be the inferior ones, and I don't know if it shows it, but they're called what again? The inferior calculi. Can't see it, but it's inferior. We also are going to have the substantia nigra. So where is she at? She's right here. We're going to have the red nucleus. So you see why it's red. It's rich in color. We're going to have the substantia nigra. And the substantia does what again? You were there. Right. And so it does subconscious muscle activities. The red nucleus does what? Voluntary movement for limbs, right? Right. And so then we also have the tectum. The tectum has the inferior elevations of the tectum are a part of what pathway? Right. Auditory. And the superior ones are going to be for what again? Right. So they're going to be reflex center for visual activities. Then we're going to have the anterior part, and that's going to include the cerebral cortex. And it's going to so the anterior part of these cerebral punctacles, they're going to conduct nerve impulses from the motor areas in the cerebral cortex to the spinal cord, medulla, and the pons. And if you don't see, here are the nerves. Here's the oculomotor nerves. And then I'm trying to see, here's the nucleus where the oculomotor nerves will be. And then we will also have, there should be the trochlear nerves, but I don't see them on this motherfucking shit. But okay. So the reticular formation, which if we go back to slide 33, it's right here. reticular formation. So what is the reticular formation? Well, this is going to be a broad region where white and gray matter exhibit a net-like arrangement from the upper part of the spinal cord throughout the brainstem into the lower part of the dicephalon. So this motherfucker is everywhere. So you can say it's a really broad region because it's gonna include the upper part of the spinal cord, the brainstem, and it's gonna go into the lower part of the dicephalon. And the dicephalon includes three things. And what are those? So it's gonna be in the lower part of those. It's gonna be in the brainstem, going throughout the brainstem, and it's also gonna go into the upper part of the spinal cord. So the medulla oblongata, essentially. All right, and it's going to be a network of small groups of neuronal cell bodies that are going to be scattered among bundles of axons. So you could say it's right here. This is what it is: clusters of neuronal bodies, which are going to be gray matter, and it's going to have small bundles of myelinated axons, which is going to be white matter. And so both these neurons in the white matter and in the gray matter, these neuronal cell bodies and these axons are going to have both ascending and descending functions. So both sensory and motor functions, right? Yes. Remember, because the reticular is going to be a network of small groups of neuronal cell bodies, right? And so their neuronal cell bodies are also neurons, and they're going to have both ascending and descending. A network of small groups of neuronal cell bodies. Right. That are going to be scattered among bundles of axons. And those axons are going to be in the white matter, and those cell bodies will be in the gray matter. Among the bundles of axons. So remember when we talked about in spinal cord, ascending was sensory, right? And descending is motor. So they both have motor and sensory skills. So there's this thing. So a part of the reticular formation is going to be called a reticular activating system, or RAS. And so there's going to be what was I doing here? All right, so yes. And what this will do will consist of sensory axons that project to the cerebral spinal cord. Sorry, not the cerebral spinal cortex. What was I thinking? The cerebral cortex. So it's going to consist of sensory axons that project to the cerebral cortex, both directly and through the thalamus. So go through the thalamus. Uh, so again, the reticular activating system consists of sensory axons that project to the cerebral cortex and go through the thalamus. All right. And what does it do? It helps maintain consciousness. Correct. Mm-hmm. The RAS helps maintain consciousness. Now let's talk about the cerebellum. Say it with me. Cerebellum. All right. This is the second largest portion of the brain. The first largest is what? Right. It occupies inferior and posterior aspects of the cranial cavity. So inferior lower and posterior. So it goes from the back and it's below the cerebrum. Below the cerebrum and it's in the back of the brain. No. It's gonna go from it's gonna go be inferior to the cerebrum and posterior, so it's on the back of the head of the brain. All right. All right. And so, all right, I'm making sure I'm staying on track. Oh damn, we almost done the paper, y'all. Yeah, well, we're on there. All right, so and I will be sending this to you guys so you can look at it over and over and over and over and over again. Yes, I will be sending it to you guys. So just if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm confused, look back at the video. You do? Okay, that's really good. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Yes. I'm glad to hear that. This is helping. Okay. All right. Well, the cerebellum has this thing called a vermis. Vermis, not a vermint, not like a Q. JK Q. JK, I love you, girl. But it's gonna have this thing called a vermis, and a vermis is the central. It's gonna be a central, kind of constricted area of the cerebellum that separates the two cerebellar hemispheres. Again, I will show you right here what the vermis is. It's right here, and you see how it's a something that separates the two hemispheres. It's like a ball sack. Yeah. It's like a small. Why does it close at 4? Why is it closing at 4? Hold up. Now I'm about to call him. Pausing the video, y'all. Technical difficulties. Apparently, it's not a technical difficulty. The library does close at 4. Some bullshit, you know what I'm saying? But okay, whatever slide we stop at is what we'll pick up tomorrow. Okay. All right, so here we go. Oh, by the way, we're right here on the study guide, y'all. All right, so back to where we were. So the vermis, again, if you look on slide 36, you will see what the vermis is. Q said it was something about a scrotum and a penis. Yeah. So it is the central constricted area of the cerebellum that separates the two cerebral hemispheres. As you can see, it's right in the middle and it separates the two cerebral hemispheres. Right. Then we have, now let's talk about the lobes. So there's lobes of the cerebellum, and there's 2 lobes right here, the anterior lobe and the posterior lobes. And what they will do is control subconscious aspects of the skeletal movement. And they control subconscious aspects of skeletal movement. We then have the flow culonodular lobe, and this is also on slide 35. Don't ask me to spell it because it's on there. It's in red. And what this is it's on the inferior side of surface. It's on the inferior surface of the cerebellum, and what it helps is it helps with equilibrium and balance. All right. Lobe. It's on the inferior side of the cerebellum, and what it helps is contributes to balance and equilibrium. All right. Let's talk about the cerebral cortex now. So the cerebral cortex has it's a superficial layer of the cerebellum. You can look at on slide 36. It should show you where it is. The cerebellar cortex right here. All right. It's gray matter. And it consists of gray matter and series of folds, and those folds are going to be called folia. All right. And then inside of the cerebellum, there's going to be deep to the gray matter are tracts of white matter. And those white matters are going to be kind of like branching out, and they're going to be called arbor vitae. So it's going to be deep to the gray matter of the cerebellum, and it's going to be tracts, and what they are tracts of white matter, and they're going to be called arbor vitae. And they kind of look like branching out. So if you look here, you see it's right here, the white matters in white, right where my thing is. That's going to be the arbor vitae. All the white stuff you see. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the cerebellar peduncles. What also has peduncles? I said it before. Mm-hmm. Just did. Yes, the midbrain has peduncles. So also cerebellum does too. And what the and so it has it's a so the punticle of the cerebellum is a bundle of nerve axons that connect the cerebellum with the brainstem, and will send these nerve impulses back and forth from the brainstem to the cerebellum to the brainstem. So again, this cerebellar peduncle is a bundle of nerve axons that connect the cerebellum with the brainstem. Mm-hmm. To the brainstem, and it's also right here. It says right here. There's also three pairs of these peduncles. There's a superior one, a middle one, and also an inferior peduncle. All right. And so, what are the functions of the cerebellum and all, right? What is the function? What the fuck does it do? Well, it coordinates movements, it helps regulate posture and balance, as well as what also does regulates equilibrium and balance. Mm-hmm. The flaccolodon dondoler lobe. The blah 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 lobe.
It's like you don't have to know how to pronounce it clearly, but you got to know it, okay? That's it. That's in Hectare's breakdown. It's on the test. Know that shit.
All right. So, all right, boom. We got to the thalamus. So the thalamus is going to be part of uh, what the diencephalon, right? I couldn't. And so it's gonna be make up 80% of the diencephalon. So it's the biggest portion of the diencephalon. And so the thalamus is a large oval structure that is located bilaterally on either side of the third ventricle. What side did she get up to in class? Because I left when she was talking about the thalamus.
we did talk about the limbic system.
Okay, that's not too far.
Because I remember she was talking about the basal ganglia. I think she was just getting into.
Okay, so we're good. We're good. So
Yeah,
let's just.
she got all the way up to here, 56.
Okay, we're gonna finish it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
We're on 39. I'm trying to get the 40 real quick. So
But where did you?
it's an 80%, 39. Thalamus. So thalamus is a large oval structure located on both sides of the third ventricle. So you'll see the third ventricle, and it's going to be on both sides. And it's going to consist of two masses of gray matter that is organized into a nuclei. So all these gray matter, so the two sides of the two masses of the thalamus is going to consist of gray matter. And that gray matter is going to be organized into different nuclei. And so the thalamus is going to be the main relay center for sensory impulses ascending into the cerebral cortexes. So those sensory impulses that are in the cerebral cortex is going to have is mainly going to come from the thalamus. So its main relay center is going to be for sensory impulses, and those sensory impulses are going to ascend to the cerebral cortex.
Hold up, you will have to say that one more time and a little bit slower for me.
All right, so again, the thalamus has a main relay center, and those relay centers are going to be for sensory impulses. And all those sensory impulses that are in the thalamus is going to ascend to the cerebral cortex. Two.
But remember, the cerebral cortex is on top of the cerebrum.
So the cerebral cortex and the cerebellar cortex are two different things. Yes, they're the cerebral cortex and because remember the cerebral cortex is where in the cerebrum. The thalamus is where in the diencephalon. It's going to be its own little thing. All right. So then we also have uh so remember I said that they have there's a mass, two masses that make up the thalamus, right? So these masses are going to join the left and the right halves together. And it's gonna the intermediate mass joins the right and the left halves. So I'm gonna show you what it looks like.
So it's called the intermediate.
The intermediate mass. If you go on slide 40, it's right there. And remember, only 70% of the population has it. So not everybody has this intermediate mass. But when it's there, what it's supposed to do is join both halves of the thalamus together. All right, and that's where it is right there.
It's like the brain has like double structure or triple structure. Because it's like you got the brain, all the little parts that hold the parts of the brain together. Then you go deeper, and it's like you got the diencephalon, which is another organ that got other parts holding together. So it's kind of like that egg that opens up, and there's another egg that opens up. That's exactly what I'm thinking about right now. When you think about that brain, it's like a whole system in another system in another system. It's so complex.
All right, so there's 7 major groups of nuclei that are in the thalamus. We have the major relay station, and this is going to be for most sensory impulses. So there's 7 groups of nuclei, and so one of them is going to have are going to be major relay stations for most sensory impulses.
Yeah, I know these groups.
No, all you got to know is that what I just said. The major relay station is for most sensory impulses. Because that's exactly what she said in the study guide. Function relay station for most sensory impulses. That is what thalamus does. It is the major relay station for most sensory impulses. It also contributes to motor function. And that's why sometimes it's called no, that's not okay. All right. And I don't think I don't know if she wants you guys us to, you guys us to know the major groups because there's medial nuclei, there's lateral group, there's lateral posterior nuclei and pulvinar nuclei, there's ventral group, there's the ventral anterior nucleus, there's the ventral lateral nucleus, there's the study guide. So I'm not going to speak about
she
it.
said just go off the study guide. She said this chapter is really that thick that she don't want nobody going astray. So she said, so if it ain't on the study guide, she said don't go.
Right. So I'm not going to go through it.
She actually said that her mouth like don't be too deep into it. Just go off the study guide.
Right.
But she know how thick it is.
So let's talk about the hypothalamus real quick. So the hypothalamus is a portion of the diencephalon that lies beneath the thalamus, and it forms the floor and part of the wall of the third ventricle. So again, it's inferior to the thalamus, and it's going to form the floor and part of the wall of the third ventricle. And it's going to compose of dozens of nuclei, but it's going to have 4 major regions. Are you ready for these regions?
No. She's not ready. What is that part we said? It forms the floor and the what?
It forms the floor of and part of the wall of the third ventricle. All right, so let's get to it, bitch. So there's 4 regions. The first one is called the mammillary region. If you guys don't know, I'm on slide 41. Mammillary region is adjacent to the midbrain, so it's next to the midbrain, and it's most posterior part of the thalamus. So this region is going to be the most posterior part of the thalamus. And what is it going to include? It's going to include mammillary bodies and also posterior hypothalamic nuclei. Yes, it's adjacent. It's next to. All right. It's going to include mammillary bodies and posterior hypothalamic nuclei. Hypothalamic nuclei. She just says post. Oh, it says posterior hypothalamic nuclei right there. When she said post, she means posterior. And so what is the mammillary region do? It's a relay station for reflexes related to the sense of smell. So when it talks about sense of smell, the reflex of the sense of smell, so if I go like, that nasty bitch, like that reflex, that's going to come from the mammillary region. Now let's go to the tuberal region. The tuberal region is going to be the widest part of the hypothalamus. And this is going to include the dorsal medial nucleus. It's not up there.
Oh, wait a minute, what you reading? Oh, okay.
Tubular region. It's the widest part of the hypothalamus, and it's going to include the dorso-medial nucleus, the ventral media, and the arcuate nucleus, and also includes the infundibulum, right there. It contains the dorsal medial nucleus, the ventral medial nucleus, and the arcuate nucleus. And it will also include the infundibulum.
You said it includes the
Dorso-medial nucleus.
Dorsal and medial, or is it called dorsal medial nucleus?
It's called dorsal medial nucleus. The ventromedial nucleus. Ventro.
Like ventral or ventral light?
Like VENTRO.
Okay, ventral.
And the AU.
Ventral what?
Medial.
Ventral medial.
Mm-hmm.
Nucleus.
Mm-hmm. And the next one is ARUC. Sorry, ARCU ATE nucleus, and it also includes the infundibulum, which is right here.
It's an arcuate what? That word
Nucleus, ARC.
UATE,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's an infundibulum.
And this is going to be like a stalk-like structure that attaches the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus of the brain, which is right here. It's a stalk-like feature that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. And then we have the median eminence, which is a slightly raised region that encircles the infundibulum. So this right here circles this. So the median eminence circles the infundibulum. It circulates, it encircles, it covers it. Then we have the supraoptic region. This is going to be, it's going to lie superior to the optic chiasm, and then it's going to contain paraventricular nucleus. It's going to contain. It's also going to contain the hypothalophagocyal tract, and that's going to extend through the infibulum to the pituitary gland, and it's right here. All that you need to know about the supraoptic region. So it's going to lie superior, so lie above the optic chiasm, which are going to be axons from the nuclei within the pituitary gland, and then they're going to form until the optic chiasma is going to then form this tract right here. And then this tract is going to extend through the infibulum to the pituitary gland. So, supraoptic region is above the chiasma, and which is axon from the pituitary gland. From the axons from the nuclei from the pituitary gland. Mm-hmm. Which are in the pituitary gland. Um, and then it says something about hypothalamus. Yes, that tract is going to extend through the infibulum to the pituitary gland, and it's going to come from the pituitary gland though. This tract comes from the pituitary gland. It will go into the infundibulum. All right. Last region, we have the preoptic region. So this is going to be anterior to the supraoptic region, and is usually considered part of the hypothalamus because it participates with the hypothalamus in regulating certain autonomic activities. And so everything you need to know about the preoptic region is also right here. It's going to be anterior to the supraoptic region, and it's part of the hypothalamus because it helps regulate autonomic activities. And autonomic means involuntary. We're stopping here. It is slide 41. I wanted to get to 50, but we did good because if we were here for one more, I want to say 1 hour, we would have got to 50, maybe a little bit ahead. It's okay. We are shutting down. She is coming here. She wants us to leave, and that is okay. We're leaving. Yeah. Get up off this ass, boy. All right, bye, y'all. When I get to the office, I will be sending this to you guys. Bye. Bye. Let me save it though. Make sure I save it.